we're going to introduce and kick off with our very first panel and talk on the capital side of things. What's been happening or not happening around venture capital within the Bitcoin ecosystem. Ladies and gentlemen, a big round of applause for my panel of speakers, Sam of North Island Ventures, Leeor of Spartan Group, and Vishal of Multicoin Capital. Welcome, gentlemen. A lot to talk about. I'm fortunate enough to have gotten to know each of you over the years and talk through some of the venture capital trends and activities that we've seen in Web3. But to kick us off, this last year, really in 2023, was a little slower for venture capital in Web3. Curious on your thoughts. Are we now looking ahead to the next big thing in crypto, and maybe what's your thesis, or what are you excited about when it comes to Bitcoin, since we've been around for over 15 years and growing now? Sam, we'll start with you.
Sure. I think there's maybe two separate things to consider. There's Bitcoin, the asset that has been a predominantly, call it macro investment, and that is a whole kind of discussion, maybe for another time. The second thing that is emerging that is, I think, more interesting and probably a big reason why we're all here is the development of Bitcoin ecosystem as a technology. And we're seeing that in the development of Bitcoin layers, commonly known as kind of L2s.
Yep.
And that development is especially interesting, I think, for probably one specific thing. And that is the development of Bitcoin layers, well, I'll just refer to them as Bitcoin L2s, are in a very unique position to unlock 1.3 trillion of locked capital, right? The Bitcoin market cap is roughly 1.3 trillion. That Bitcoin is effectively locked and doesn't do anything, right? And when you compare Bitcoin L2s to Ethereum, Solana, Alt L1s, Layer 2s on Ethereum, all those are competing on technical aspects and to attract capital, right? Two very hard things to compete on. And when you contrast that to Bitcoin Layer 2s, they're, in theory, at a huge advantage because they're embedded within the largest pool of crypto capital, i.e. the Bitcoin market cap. And so if you're going to unlock that, the potential for Bitcoin layers is magnitudes more than what it could be for, call it, other layer one blockchains.
And just a stat I looked up this morning, when we look at that number, back in December 2023, Leeor, you and I looked at this at the end of the year last year. That total market cap represented on the L2 and layer side about $320 million. Today, 7 months later, we are looking at almost a 7x growth in 7 months at $2.2 billion, which when we look at Ethereum to Bitcoin and that ratio, it opens up, to your point, almost a $183 billion potential market as of numbers this morning, which is, as you said, a huge opportunity. Leeor.
Yeah, just to weigh in on that, I think one of the elements that stood out to us, and we've been kind of long-term believers that Bitcoin could be more than just the equivalent of a digital commodity in that sense, and the emergence of an ecosystem. We're very early supporters of Stack, specifically in Blockstack, and in helping lead the ICO back in the day, all the way to what we published jointly together with Stacks in December 23 was our Bitcoin Layers report, which is what we're referring to. I think the intention there is really the notion that there is something here that is unique to being a digital commodity or the version of digital gold. And it's that ecosystem play of what can be developed and designed from an infrastructure layer. When we look at Bitcoin historically, it's always been a financial, technological, and legal innovation. And all three of those things are equally important in understanding where the industry is going. I think there's been a huge demand and understanding for what the macro play is around Bitcoin as a financial instrument. And going beyond that, though, I mean, what does the legal and technical upgrade of many of the aspects of our capital markets, financial fabric, and infrastructure, what does that actually represent? And I think for us, I mean, ever since we've been on the journey with Stacks, we see that there has been a continuous compounding growth and adoption of this industry and what's possible within it. And the fact that we even have events such as these Bitcoin Builder conferences, which are dedicated to ecosystem and development within them, I mean, this is again what I would consider one of the most unique aspects of what makes this industry grow and thrive. And if you were to make that comparison between Bitcoin and gold, you don't have a similar nature and structure of gold developer conferences, right? I mean, it's a fundamentally different product and infrastructure that we're talking about, and that's really what gets us excited about where this industry can go and where we want to take it, which I'm sure we'll dive much further into.
Yeah. Vishal?
Yeah, there cannot be more in addition to that, but I'll keep it short. So I'm old enough to realize that there was a time where Bitcoiners, by choice, pushed all the innovation out to preserve the sound money narrative, which clearly is paying dividends in heaps today. But somewhere in the late 2010s, early 20s, the narrative was just be digital gold, and I'm still fine with that narrative, to be honest. But I think the taproot upgrade and unlock of ordinals has, and including a lot of developers pushing for it, has given a ticket for all the developers to reimagine what we can do on Bitcoin. So it's all about developers and what they do with that. What I would recommend is, or I would like to see is, developers come with fresh eyes and see what innovation has happened, repatriate it objectively for what actually Bitcoin can outperform on. And when I say that, to me, that is, Bitcoin has entrenched itself in a league of its own when it comes as a financial asset. So what can you do with a financial asset, like lending and things to build on top? Technology will eventually be commoditized. So you just see what business can you build with the best financial asset in the digital world.
And Vishal, on the Multicoin side, you've just recently started to enter the Bitcoin ecosystem. What was the moment that made that flip happen to start entering into the Bitcoin ecosystem, having been more prominently on the Ethereum and EVM Solana side as well?
Right. So I saw ordinals in Q1 of 2023, and then saw this was cool, but there was not enough data point to say it's worth investing time right now, among 100 other things to spend time on. Then I told myself, let's follow it from the sidelines, and when you can objectively say there is enough momentum here, dive in. So came Q3, Q4 of 2023, I could see that momentum building to a point I have not seen since Bitcoin Cash hard fork days. And I was like, wow, this is real. Then I was like, okay, fine, but I still don't know how much of it is hype or real. So I called somebody who is deep into the ordinal space, etc. And I was like, hey man, like, what's going on here? And he gave me a bunch of things, but like the thing that actually stood out to me was, is it too much to ask to borrow against your Bitcoin trustlessly? And I was like, no. We just saw BlockFi and a bunch of other people go in 2022 way. And I was like, if there is a remote chance that we can actually, in the spectrum of trust and censorship, reach a very optimal outcome where people can start borrowing trustlessly against the best financial asset in the digital world, that's it. It will just break all the floodgates. And that's when I actually started looking into it.
And thank you, Vishal. Sam, you mentioned that there is a $1.3 trillion opportunity in terms of Bitcoin right now in its market cap. When we look at DeFi on Bitcoin, is this a revolutionary opportunity that is copy and paste from what we've seen in other ecosystems, or is this something completely unique and specific to Bitcoin and its possibilities?
I think it'll start off a little bit more copy-paste, if you will, and then it can evolve beyond that. To put kind of like context around that, some of the numbers you just mentioned. So on Ethereum TVL is like 50-ish billion. Yep. There's about 85 billion worth of stables. Solana TVL is like 5-ish billion and like 3 billion worth of stables. like all those numbers on like Bitcoin layer 2s are like non-existent.
Yeah.
Right? They're virtually zero. And for the reasons myself and some of my colleagues discussed, is like there's real opportunity there. So how does that opportunity kind of play out? Like, I think, as Vishal mentioned, like you have in Bitcoin the asset, like one of the best financial assets. Like, go use that to do other financial things. And so what does that mean? That means like the birth of DeFi amongst Bitcoin layer 2s should be like an obvious place to start, right? Borrow, lend, DEX trading. Those are the two main things, probably a third being a stable coin in there. And so what you need in order to do that is you need to be able to port somehow trustlessly Bitcoin, the asset, from the Bitcoin blockchain to a layer 2, right? And through stacks and SBTC, that can facilitate that. That's a critical unlock, a Trojan horse, if you will. And then once you have that, like, you need to be able to do things, right? I suspect there's going to be a huge supply of people willing to lend their Bitcoin. The question then becomes like, okay, what are you going to do with that borrowed Bitcoin? Or what assets can you start trading on that? What we've observed in the Ethereum DeFi ecosystem and Solana to a lesser extent is like there's demand to do these things, but there's often like a shortage of capital. Because you need to create capital in order to do that, and in the form of airdrops and so forth, like Ethereum and Solana, those ecosystems have kind of fabricated capital to do that. Whereas like in Bitcoin layer 2s, like you don't need that creation of capital. The capital is there, and that capital hasn't been willing to do anything. And the bet on stacks and like Bitcoin layer 2s is that by giving the capital holders something to do, they're going to engage.
What's maybe some of the advantages and disadvantages, however, with DeFi on Bitcoin? I mean, we've seen almost 8 years now of DeFi within the Ethereum and EVM ecosystems. Looking at Bitcoin, what are some of the advantages or disadvantages and challenges that could arise as we start to see the unlock of Bitcoin DeFi? And Sam, we'll start back with you and head over.
So the advantages of like Bitcoin DeFi, I think maybe I'm sounding like a broken record here, is the $1 trillion of capital that it's embedded within, right? Whereas other DeFi ecosystems had needed to bootstrap their capital, literally in the form of ICOs, airdrops, things like that. Whereas like in Bitcoin DeFi, like you don't need to do that. The capital is there. The big question is like, are people going to actually engage in this thing? And so the engagement then I think comes into, what are these borrow lend protocols? What are these DEXs? Many of which are like in development now, but like they're not really there. Right. And so there's still some development that needs to occur to enable Bitcoin holders to do something with their Bitcoin. That is the biggest challenge right now.
Vishal.
Do you want to go?
No, please. Yeah.
Okay. I'll start with the disadvantages because they are not spoken mostly, and it's going to take years, even if we at all succeed. To give an analogy of the physical world, Wall Street exists because businesses exist. It's not the other way around, that businesses exist because Wall Street exists. So in this analogy, DeFi is Wall Street, but Wall Street needs businesses. It's going to be extremely tough to actually build businesses on Bitcoin just because of the limited nature of its current architecture and the volatility of dispersion of what could the future architectures look like. So, like, until you actually have, like, a case in point is deep in networks on Solana, for example, right? If you can build something like that on Bitcoin, where there is actual real-world utility or a metaverse utility, whatever you want to call it, that can tie back to tokens, that could actually be traded and stored on Bitcoin blockchain in a cheap and fast way, unless you do that, it's very hard for businesses to thrive. So if that doesn't happen, then there is no DeFi. Like, sure, you can play the looping games and yield farming and all that for a few years, but it all comes to a rest if you don't have businesses. Now, the good side of the DeFi on Bitcoin is the following. Like, it goes back to the same point. Bitcoin has optimized and, in my mind, practically won the best digital asset, the most sound asset in the digital world. Think of, for the longest time, US Treasuries on Wall Street. Can you build an entire financial system around such a pristine asset? Be it like taking loans, getting mortgages, like savings, and all those things that humans need to survive with currencies in their bank account. You can literally build a financial services businesses on Bitcoin with no problems.
Yeah, and just to weigh in there, I actually think the analogy beyond just Wall Street is an important one to make, because I don't see Bitcoin as the competitor to necessarily Wall Street in this instance, but rather the central banks that underpin the way money flows through the financial system, including Wall Street. And the advantage of Bitcoin is you have the most robust and sound, technologically driven financial instrument that is competing not with corporate and institutional banking, but with central banking, right? And that whole idea of the way in which fiscal and monetary policy is interacting with society. And if you're building on that fabric, which is the most robust and sound store of value in the world, which I think many people in this room at least would agree, especially over a longer period of time and long-term horizon, you will continue to see the advantages of that playing out. So there is no better place for you to start building and developing any tool and all of this kind of financial infrastructure to provide services for payments, savings, investments, mortgages. All of that linked to a Bitcoin product is by design and by default going to be a more robust and therefore more desirable product to be holding than anything that we're sitting in the US, I'll say it here, but a USD-linked mortgage, for example, and any instrument that you're working with leverage here within the traditional capital markets. And I think that that's really the opportunity set. And this is someone sitting in Switzerland, where I'm based, at least most of the year. For us, I mean, we see these dynamics play out where, I mean, what has been the role of the Swiss franc over the last 70 years or 80 years since the Second World War? The only reason it really exists in any meaningful way as a global currency is because of that lack of volatility and because of that stability of a local base capital market, foundational economy that it can draw and derive value from. That's the only reason, right? I mean, it's not because it's a superior product as a financial foreign exchange currency. It works the same way that the euro does. People want to hold Swiss francs for investments and store of value. They don't want to hold euros, which has depreciated 40% since its inception. And I think if we apply that same logic to what have we created within digital currencies and the way in which global markets work and understand to be built on, once we have maintained and developed enough trust within the Bitcoin ecosystem, which I already believe we have, we're building additional fabric on top of that. It is the dominant design, dominant product. It's a question of how do we do that. And obviously there are a lot of challenges there on the technical side that players like Stacks are solving for, but certainly the long-term momentum and trend is this is what we've achieved within 15 years. Imagine what we're going to be able to show for this after 150 years. And that's kind of the gap now, which is exciting. Never been more excited about anything in my entire life, frankly, and really where we're spending a lot of our time.
So I want to get a little spicy for a moment, since we've got 4 investors that are sitting up here on this panel, and I get asked this question a lot. And again, I've been lucky enough to discuss this with each of you. Is from a venture capital standpoint, most VCs or investors have been truthfully a little slow to move into betting in the Bitcoin ecosystem. We get asked a lot of this by founders. There's some founders in the audience and other fellow investors. So to each of you, why the hesitation? If there's a $1.3 trillion market already sitting there, there's over 40 million active wallets with more than $1 sitting in them right now. We've seen 7x growth in the market TVL in just the Bitcoin ecosystem in 7 months. We've got a number of protocols, the early emergence of in terms of Bitcoin DeFi. We have all these things happening. What is the hesitation to move into this ecosystem aggressively, as we have seen in other ecosystems in the past? Vishal, I'm going to start with you on this one.
If you're getting spicy, then a lot of those stats don't mean anything. Yeah. Like over the few years, billions of dollars have gone into gaming on blockchains. What do we have to show for that? Nada. So like, a lot of it is just narrative play. People are like, oh, this makes sense. This happened in Web 2, so can happen in Web 3. But Web 2 was information. Web 3 is value. So first of all, the analogy breaks down. TVL games, we also in 2021, there were like crazy TVLs all across the board. Doesn't mean anything, at least from the way we see it from our seat. Yeah. What really matters is, can an entrepreneur come to me and tell me, this is the time we need to build on Bitcoin because of these reasons? And the reasons I want to hear are because of Taproot and Ordinal and something else that can change my mind. Otherwise, you could have built your business like in 2017, 18, 19 as well. The second I want to hear is why Bitcoin? Because you have to be able to say, this blockchain has 17 problems, but still I'm going to build on this because Ethereum, Solana, Aptos, name whatever, can never achieve what Bitcoin already has in their specific use case. And third, then you just say, okay, now you have locked down the timing, you have locked down the reason. What are the future states, given there is so much dispersion of different architectural designs? So why is your business future-proof to those things? Or you can make an argument that, hey, look, I'm going to go get customers, and I'm going to make so many millions in revenue, and whenever the tech shifts under the surface, I'll just plug it. So that kind of maturity is required from an entrepreneur, and in my experience, it's not founders' problems today because up until last year, everybody thought Bitcoin was digital gold. So the ecosystems need to mature. Like we have seen founders from, for 4 or 5, at least I have seen for 4 or 5 years, and people have seen for 10 plus years. It's a curve. So I think Bitcoin founders, as they go through the motions in the next year or two, will start eliminating, substance and what's not substance. And I think we'll all grow.
Thank you, Vishal. Sam?
Yeah, so the hesitancy on venture investing in Bitcoin L2, I think, comes down to a simple question of why now.
Yeah.
A lot of what we discussed of like the potential of Bitcoin, the Bitcoin blockchain as a medium to build financial rails on, that's existed for like a dozen years.
Yeah.
Right? And so you make that pitch, you're like, okay, cool, that all makes sense, but like, how come it hasn't happened yet, right? And so from an investor standpoint, like timing can be kind of important. Like there's usually a lot of good ideas. The difference between good ideas that make and good ideas that don't make it can often come down to timing. And for the longest time, like the timing just hasn't been right for, the longer term view that the three of us share. Probably the 4 of us actually, and a lot more in this room share what Bitcoin as a blockchain could become. And so why now is like, I believe the why now is different. And it's different for a few reasons. One, as Vishal mentioned, like the development of inscriptions, ordinals, BRC20s in 2020, well, I guess end of 22 into 23 were, in my mind, like the first kind of green shoot that we saw of people willing to engage with the Bitcoin blockchain in a way that was beyond like Bitcoin, the asset, as digital gold. So that kind of opened the aperture a little bit, that there is some demand to do something. The second thing that changed is the culture of the Bitcoin community seems to be evolving. The sheer fact, as Leeor mentioned, that we're having this conference now, right? In years past, that was not a thing, right? Yeah. We have like Bitcoin builder equivalent conferences at like ETH Denver, right? Like that was never a thing before, right? So the fact that the community is like interested in building something, that's the second thing I point to as to like why now is different. The third thing I would point to as to like why now is different is I think the miners have like starting to wake up to like their business models are not the most sound, and if every 4 years the Bitcoin they earn in units drops 50% on the halving, like that's their headline numbers, just headline revenue numbers just compressing constantly unless you're going to have material price appreciation. And so the miners have like clued into this. They sit on a lot of Bitcoin, and they are starting to invest in like the Bitcoin ecosystem with a view that like we need another form of revenue to as in like the Bitcoin network needs another form of revenue. Yeah. And that you look over at other blockchains, they're like, well, if you offer different products and services that people are willing to pay fees for, like that is a source of revenue. And that source of revenue, in my mind, improves the integrity and the security budget of Bitcoin, the blockchain, and hence miners as a business model.
So with that said, for you and Leeor, since Vishal kind of leaned into this on the Multicoin side, what does it take for a company to stand out to either of you being pitched? Or, are there certain benchmarks that you're looking for now that things are still early, but are starting to mature a little bit, and we have some comps from other ecosystems? Leeor, we'll start with you.
Yeah, happy to weigh in here, because I think for us, we've been tracking the ecosystem for a long time now, and I mentioned big supporters of Stacks, obviously, and several of the projects that are building and developing on Stacks has been a core focus for us for how do you grow the whole ecosystem thereof. And for us, it's, again, comes back down to that point of, I hate to be the VC on a stage saying it's a team topic, but you want people who maybe don't have the traction necessarily today, but have the right mindset and, the dedication to work across cycle are still going to be here in 2-3 years, let alone 20, 30 years, realizing the vision that they've articulated so well in a pitch deck, and going through and actually developing on that. And I think where we are today is there are, if I take a step back to the timeline that you've referred to as well, 12 months ago, this probably wouldn't have even been on anyone's radar that there was going to be a Bitcoin Builders Conference. I think we had the first joint Bitcoin Day at Token 2049 last year in Singapore in Asia, together with Stacks. I mean, this started to really build an idea that there is a segment of the community and industry who, yes, believes in, loves Bitcoin, yes, is into the crypto industry more broadly, but bringing that together into specifically wanting to build and develop on Bitcoin is a relatively new concept in terms of how we are going about doing that on a professional roadmap for creating venture-backed projects to actually develop this. And I don't think the lack of VC funding is the issue. I think it's the lack of maturity of the builder ecosystem itself, because there are several groups of entrepreneurs now, and I think nowadays you can count almost 200 different layer 2s building in the space. And of course, not all of these need to be funded and compete with each other, but we've kind of seen that mushrooming effect. But ultimately, what it comes down to is, are there people with track records of being able to commit to development timelines, ideas that they're looking to bring to life, execute on that, show those KPIs, and then continue to do that with additional funding and additional time. And just frankly, where we are today, the answer is there aren't that many projects other than, frankly, Stacks, which have been on the journey for multiple years now, who have that track record of consistently delivering when things are good in bull market and not so good in bear market, right? And I think that's what we're looking for. And many people would say that over the next 2-3 years, there will be a lot of money invested in it. I don't think that we haven't done enough today. I think it's in line with where the industry is in terms of maturity on that builder side of building on Bitcoin itself.
So we've just passed the halfway point of this year. We already threw out some data points of where things have come in the last 6-7 months. We've got a number of upcoming launches for mainnets. We've got some of the first trial and errors of ZK proofs around both Bitcoin testnet and today announced mainnet. What are your predictions of where the Bitcoin ecosystem goes from here? If we look ahead the last few months of the year, but more into 2025, what are your predictions on how the ecosystem grows? Vishal, we'll start with you.
That's a very hard one. Don't quote me on any of this.
This can be spicy too, Vishal, don't worry.
I think you'll go through a trough of disillusionment. I think most L2s will be dead on arrival because they don't solve any problem. They create more. But through that trough of disillusionment, you'll see the real teams with the different other teams.
Yeah.
And with whatever is happening in the macro side of the things, like Bitcoin ETF, more awareness across billions of people, and them getting access to that will lead to opportunities to build financial services, the DeFi, on the remaining L2s.
Leeor.
Yeah, I double down and always come back down to the idea of a trustless, permissionless network. And I think anyone who's building that kind of idea of a sovereign financial system, which again, not linked to a single currency, but is really looking at Bitcoin as the de facto reserve currency of the world, I think that that's where you will see the traction. So looking at projects who, I know we make fun of TVL and other KPIs, which maybe are not relevant, they still matter, right? I think in terms of getting attention and mindshare, I don't think because you have a better TVL today, you're going to be the long-term winner tomorrow, but it certainly matters in getting mind share. And I think certainly at this stage of the industry, on the developer side of Bitcoin specifically, we're still very early. And seeing teams who are able to, convince key ecosystem players, miners, especially people with significant treasuries and balances, to get involved, to borrow and lend in these ecosystems, it doesn't mean that you're technologically superior and have created a moat that's better than anyone else, but it means you've been able to solve one of the key pieces of the puzzle, which is convincing people to use you for a reason, and that is a big part of this industry. Right? It's all about trust at the end of the day. You can have trustless technology, but the actual ecosystem that you're building on top of it, the application and business that we're referring to, is still being designed and developed in a way that needs to make sense and people trust. So I think that really the next 2-3 years is building these trustless models on the back of Bitcoin infrastructure, and the people who are able to solve that, get momentum and traction, will be exponentially more successful than anyone building on any other chain in any other ecosystem over that period.
Sam?
I say this as a supporter of stacks in the Bitcoin layer 2 kind of ecosystem, but in the timeline you asked for, it's very simple. SBTC needs to work.
Yep.
Right? Because none of the stuff we're talking about, like if you can't trustlessly and seamlessly move Bitcoin, the asset from the Bitcoin blockchain, to another layer that is programmable and enables all the stuff we're talking about, none of this stuff's going to work. It's as simple as that. If that works, Stacks is very much in the lead as to the development in the L2 ecosystem. It doesn't mean it necessarily win out, but if it can continue that momentum, and the unlock for that is to get SBTC to work, then the momentum will accelerate. And without that, we're going to be here in another year's time, kind of still talking about the same thing, and nothing's really changed.
I agree. Last question, because we got half a second more since I'm moderating and hosting. So we can go over just an extra minute. AI, Bitcoin and AI. AI, there's a ton of discussion that it's hype. We're at AI fatigue. Where do you each feel? Is it early? Is it hype? Is it real? AI, Bitcoin, just a quick answer. Real hype, early. Vishal, we'll start with you.
Short-term, overhyped, long-term, inseparable, because the fundamental to Bitcoin is proof of work. The fundamental to that is energy. AI only can do its stuff if it has energy. Miners need different sources of revenues. Yeah. It is inextricably linked in the long run.
Quick, Leeor.
I like the view. I think it's hype. I can't see a path where this is specifically Bitcoin is an enabler of AI, and AI is an enabler of Bitcoin, at least in the foreseeable future. Although I hope Zuckerberg's right, he's talking about AI agents and the same way he was talking about the metaverse. So for everything he is talking about and doing, at least something comes out of it in the crypto industry. But at least in the near term, I think it's, very far-fetched.
All right. Sam, close this out.
The link between crypto and AI, for the most part, is nebulous, with the exception of what Vishal explained, that for the first time in Bitcoin's history, you have a rival competing for the energy sources that power Bitcoin miners. And it's unclear how that will play out. On the one hand, that could be beneficial for Bitcoin security, because now you have more viable miners. Miners has historically been pretty poor businesses. Now they have another source of revenue and income in the form of allocating some of their infrastructure to power so effectively server farms.
Yep.
For AI. So that could be beneficial for miners. On the flip side of that coin is they're going to shift more of their resources, and particularly their access to power, to AI as opposed to Bitcoin mining, which could in theory jeopardize the security of Bitcoin.
All right. Well, that said, ladies and gentlemen, big thank you. Sam, Leeor, Vishal, thank you very much. Each of you guys, thank you.